I'd like to introduce our Vice President of Styling and Design, Brad Richards.
It's such an exciting, thrilling motorcycle to ride. But of all the designs that we've worked on, this is one where there was the least amount of change, and this is an apex predator. We want to do it better than the competition, and we want to do it in our own way that's unique. It has to be the Harley way. We wanted to stitch in some iconic elements of the design from different generations of Sportster. Whenever you do something that's kind of radically different and unexpected, you're going to shake people up. This is exactly what we want, and it's kind of the right mindset right now with the company. It took a story. There's just a huge opportunity here.
All right, guys, let me welcome you all to another Laidlaw's Harley-Davidson podcast. I'm Matt Laidlaw. I'm here with my co-host, Nick Colbert, and we're here today with a pretty awesome guest. Super excited to have Brad Richards here, the VP of Design at Harley-Davidson Motor Company. Thank you very much for coming out, Brad.
Yeah, you bet. Glad to be here.
We were able to pull Brad in. I know he was out here for other business, and I've been bugging him about coming out here for a while, doing a podcast and sitting down with us and talking all things Harley-Davidson. So thanks for getting time out of your busy schedule and coming down here. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, at the motor company, relationship we have with the dealers is obviously really important, and we certainly watch what you guys are doing out here at Laidlaw's Harley-Davidson. We love the podcast and a lot of the social media work that you do, and we're paying attention, and like we do to all dealerships in all regions. So, but it's great. It's just great to be here.
Right on, man. Right on. Thank you for that. We obviously spent a lot of time doing this, and obviously, a lot of us here at this dealership, we are in love with the brand. We love the brand, and so it's more than just a job to us. It's kind of our passion. So, let's talk a little bit, Brad. So, your official title is the VP of Design at the Harley-Davidson Motor Company.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people out there, especially that ride Harley-Davidsons, would probably describe that as like their dream job. I know there's probably a lot of work.
Keith Richards has my dream job.
Why don't you explain a little bit about what you do on a daily basis and
Sure.
What like your responsibilities are at the motor company.
Basically, my responsibilities include the design of the motorcycles. And so I'm fortunate enough to manage an extremely talented small team. There's about 24 of us. And we work on the aesthetics of the motorcycle and basically the design and paying attention to our portfolio and trying to, look out on the horizon and create what's coming next with the motor company and its products.
Very nice.
Yeah.
On a daily basis, are you in the product development center? Are you one of these guys with the block of clay, shaping things and take us through like a typical day for you?
Well, we have some people that are much more talented than I am shaping the clay. But, we have folks like that on staff. So the staff, like I said, is about 24 folks. About half of those, maybe a little more than half of those are creative designers, people that went to industrial design school, product design school, and have learned industrial design and, kind of transportation and mobility design. Drawing, actually sketching what the motorcycles look like, and then moving into the transition from a sketch and an idea that someone might have to a physical motorcycle takes a lot of people. And so we have a technical operations half of our team as well, probably the other half, 12 people or so. They're there just, they're experts in their own right. They understand how to create digital surface. They use 3D modeling tools, clay, we weld. We can pretty much make a motorcycle from ground up in our little studio there in Wauwatosa. So really, it's from the inception, kind of the idea of the sketch, or looking at the sketch and determining all right, let's explore this idea, all the way to here's sort of a finished motorcycle that we can roll out onto the into the parking lot and show the executives. So it's and even before we sketch, we like to do a lot of research. We like to say that we sleep in the ditches with our customers. Majority of my design team, if not all of them, are riders. Super passionate about the brand before they got there, kind of like I was embedded into the culture, going to the shows, going to the events, riding, kind of going through all the same things that our customers do, so that we have a pretty good idea of what would be great in sort of the next feature of a Harley-Davidson, or what would make the next great Harley-Davidson.
Yeah.
So a lot of research, a lot of traveling around. That's what we're doing here out this week. Actually, we're touring a variety of shops like your own and kind of seeing what you guys are up to. We always pay attention to places that we think kind of provoke trends, and certainly Southern California is one of those places. So we come out here a couple times a year, 3 times a year, 4 times a year, and do a tour, kind of sniff around, see if our antenna pick up anything, and that's how we make the next Harley-Davidson.
Very cool. So I have to admit, before I even met you in person, I was a big time fanboy. I think I found you first on Instagram. By the way, Zen of Nito, guys, I'll link that up here on the screen so you guys can follow Brad. It's funny because as soon as I started following Brad, I didn't know who he was, and then I saw kind of his description on his Instagram, VP of Style Design and stuff. I was like, oh wow, this guy, he's important. So let's see what this guy has to show off, and. We're going to get into the vintage stuff in a minute, but one of the things that I noticed right away about you was your love for vintage stuff, like the vintage Harley-Davidsons, and, just posting awesome pictures of it. And then I later find out those are actually your bikes that you're posting pictures of. That's not just random bikes, but very cool. Let's talk before we jump into all that stuff. Let's talk real quick as far as your background, what does it take? What has it taken in your life when you were young all the way till now to get to where you are right now? Like education, experience, things like that.
Sure. I mean, luck is a huge component. I think most people would probably, who are aware of their own kind of career paths, would realize that luck has a massive, thing to do with it, and it certainly did with me as well. Also, just the exposure to the right people, and so I'll start. I was one of those kids that just I'm sure many of us and many of the folks that are watching this, that are just, I was completely mesmerized by anything with wheels. And so that was a huge component as I was growing up. My father was a history teacher and my mother was an artist. And so my dad kind of gave me a foundational, respect for story and sort of history, certainly of America and other places. But, my dad was a great storyteller, and I kind of, that was a big piece of growing up with my father. And then my mother was an artist, so she was really creative. Luckily, I had parents that really, that sort of threw gasoline on the fire in terms of these were the only skills I have was basically sketching and drawing. I was constantly drawing cars and motorcycles and building models and kit bashing and just trying to change the look and the proportions of the things and painting, and it's all I cared about. I still can't add. I can't balance a checkbook. If this gig at Harley doesn't work out, I'll be digging ditches. It's probably the only thing I'm qualified to do other than this. But so luckily in Detroit, because of the automotive companies, that's where I grew up in Detroit. There's a really, really good school there called the College for Creative Studies. I think at the time that I went, it was called the Center for Creative Studies. But it was basically where a majority of the car companies found their industrial designers, their stylists, the guys and girls that dream up what the cars look like and work with the engineers to create them. And it is a dream job. It's very specific. You have to be sort of part engineer, part artist, part conceptual thinker. Having a maverick streak is really important because you're constantly challenging the status quo and kind of asking why with everything. That was sort of you have to be willing to kind of challenge what the standards are and try to improve things and think differently, and all those things came together. I happened to go to an arts a high school rather that had if you showed a creative background, you were kind of pulled out of the standard curriculum and put into a special curriculum just for folks that are creative, which was really beneficial for me. It was it was very lucky that this school decided to do this. And so I was able, the last 2 years of high school, to just focus on design and art and painting and so on. And then I got a scholarship for painting to this local art school that I was talking about, the College for Creative Studies, a summer scholarship. And at that time, I didn't really know too much about design. I always thought engineers kind of made cars and motorcycles. And at lunchtime, I think it was the first week I was there in the summer, I went down. I was kind of at lunchtime, they give you a break, whatever. I went down, I was exploring the school, and I went into this clay studio that was in the basement. And I saw all these great clay models of cars and motorcycles and trains, and I'm like, well, what is this, And my painting instructor said, oh, that's industrial design. That's those are folks that are going to be shaping what transportation looks like in the future. And I was like, well, I love the paint. I love painting, but that's what I'm doing. So from that moment on, I went back to school and I built a portfolio, and the goal was just to get accepted into the school, because you had to pass a pretty stringent entry. There wasn't an exam, but they look at your portfolio, they look at your kind of creative background and decide how many people, if they're going to let folks in. At that time,
this is to get into the college.
Yeah, to get into college. Thank you. Yeah. So it was at that time they would, for an industrial design class, they would I think it was maybe between maybe 20 and 30 people they would accept a year.
Oh, wow.
And then at the back end of that, there's maybe 7 that would actually graduate. I mean, every semester you put your work up and the instructors come through and say, you stay, you're going to go, sorry. You know, it was really intense because there's just not that many people that were doing it at the time. And I think now design is much more known. Like everyone is a designer because of your iPhone and Photoshop. But at that time, no one, you know, it was a pretty small little group of folks. And so that's how that's what happened. And so I studied product design at first. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Furniture design for a while, product design, transportation design. I got intimidated, to be honest, by a lot of the transportation students because they were a lot better than I was. And they, you know, for whatever reason, a lot of them were like sort of sons and daughters of like people that were already in the business, so they had a massive jump start. Mm-hmm. So I think I kind of flipped out a little bit and went, I don't know if I really want to do this. But what happened is I graduated in product design, and then the company I started working for, which was they were doing furniture design for Herman Miller and Knoll, which, you know, those are great furniture companies that I still collect and buy that stuff. But I wanted to do cars. They happened to buy a company that was starting to work for Ford and General Motors and Chrysler, doing Skunkworks design work, and they were going to start an industrial design studio. And I was luckily the first designer that they hired. So I got to hire my friends, put a clay modeling team together, you know, and I'm like 21. I don't know what the hell I'm doing, you know. So finally, finally the business grew to a point where it was like, you know, I went to the CEO and said, like, you know, I'm way out of my league here. Like I'm out of my depths. I don't know how to, you know, formulate a strategy or commercial business plan. Like I can do the design work, but so we hired someone who had that experience, and we continued to grow the business. And then, long story short, eventually Ford kind of somehow they saw my work, and they asked me to come on board and become part of their design team, which was something that I'd always wanted to do. I grew up right next to the design center at Ford and the test track, so it was sort of like in the blood that, you know, Ford would be the place to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I got into Ford and spent the majority of my time working on the truck business. And so did, I don't know, 3 or 4 F series, you know, maybe 4 or 5 F series. And we were doing Bronco before the latest Bronco. We actually, that was my second project that I did when I was there, was the full size Bronco, and it was, you know, they put it on the shelf until just a couple of years ago, and they brought it back, which was really cool to see that out there now.
Interesting, very interesting.
Yeah, and then I think the last thing I did was the Raptor. The current Raptor was something that, it was the last project I did before I left Ford, I think 8 years ago, and went to Harley, and that's like a whole nother story.
Yeah. That's so cool. Yeah, while you were talking and about the school and going down and seeing the clay and stuff, like I totally got goosebumps just because like that's so cool that someone I love. I mean, obviously, I'm a big Harley guy, and I think that engineers, the artists, the designers, guys like yourself, you're like my rock stars. And so to hear about like where you came from and like the progression in your life to go from like your dad and your mom being an artist and a teacher.
He was a history teacher.
Yeah. And just like those two things together just seem like the perfect like formula to like grow up with, to like then, you know, create Harley-Davidsons. Because a lot of what I love about, you know, Harley-Davidson, and I've certainly seen it in your work with Harley-Davidson, is so much history goes into the new designs of Harley. You know, you're always pulling from the past, pulling from past models and Harley-Davidson's history. And I think that's what people love about this style, is it's very classic and timeless.
Yeah, so, well, I mean, I always tell people that what's great about Harley-Davidson is it's a great story. You know, these 4 founders, like what they wanted to do, they were just trying to kind of, you know, they're trying to get down to the lake to, you know, quicker to fish, you know, so they, let's put a motor on a bicycle. And, you know, and they completely revolutionized motorcycling and created, you know, American motorcycling at that time. And it's so, I think my father, again, gave me the love of the story. Growing up in the Midwest, you know, growing up around the car companies, you know, and especially in Detroit, so there were so many people were into Harley. I mean, like a lot of the people that worked there, so there were bikes everywhere. So we were constantly exposed to that stuff. And I grew up on like dirt bikes and 3-wheelers, and I had paper routes, and so I had to motorize my paper routes pretty quick because I had like 3 or 4, and so in order to get the papers done before I went to school every morning, you know, I went from pedal power to a motor, and so
smart man.
Yeah, and I just always thought that was sort of the freest, like the best. Cars are great. Like I love cars. I do. I'm not. You know, I have a soft spot for cars, but like Harley has my soul. I mean, motorcycles, and specifically Harley-Davidson, has my soul, and that's like a whole nother story, like I said. But growing up in the Midwest and seeing the bikes, then realizing that Harley-Davidson was made right across the lake in Milwaukee, I just thought, well, this is great. Like, all this stuff is coming right from here. It's like, at the turn of the century, what's known now as the Rust Belt was like Silicon Valley, and like all this stuff was, all these innovations were happening, and then there you have the four founders creating this great brand, and of course the story of Harley-Davidson really resonated with me because of the historical. It was also formed the same year as Ford Motor Company, which I always thought was cool.
I didn't know that.
1903, yeah. So so that's how the Harley thing happened for me. Is I was responsible for the design of the trucks, and then they knew that myself and one other supervisor or manager that I worked for named Gordon Plato, who's a really great guy, another Harley collector, that we were bikers. So they said, hey, we're going to do these Harley F-150s. You guys take them. We have no, we don't know what this stuff's, the brand's about. So we handled the design of those for 10, years or whatever. And that's how we met Willie, because Willie would come into Dearborn to the Ford studio with Louis Netz and the crew. And every, twice a year we would ideate. They'd invite us to Sturgis. And so we got to go to Sturgis with Willie and Louis, and we'd walk around and we would ideate on like, what's the next truck going to look like? What do you think? What are you guys thinking? And we would sit down and have a beer and kind of like sketch stuff. Very cool. And then 6 months later, they'd come back into Dearborn, and we'd have like a model of it done, and they would make adjustments, and so I kind of I had some great people I worked for at Ford that were phenomenal leaders. They're great guys. Some of my best friends now. But it was great to work for Willie essentially as well too, or at least work with him. I shouldn't say not for him, because at that point he was just coming in. But to watching how he had such a passionate appreciation for the customer. And he would, and every decision we made went it wasn't going through Willie's eyes. It was going through who he perceived the customer was. And I thought that was just like really spot on, and it's called human-centric design. But at the time, I don't know if it had I'm not sure if it was called anything. He was just doing it. And he wasn't the only person doing this, but he was, it certainly made a huge effect on me. And I was like, wow, that's really cool, And then, so that's how that relationship happened. And we started riding together, and then
so cool.
Anyway,
so obviously with a background coming from Ford, I'd be curious, because as someone who's like into cars and into bikes, a lot of current car enthusiasts kind of lament crash standards and fuel efficiency because they feel it restricts design, and those are a lot less of a factor when it comes to building a motorcycle. So do you find the design of a motorcycle kind of liberating in that you're not thinking about making it as aerodynamic as possible to get the best fuel efficiency rating, and so you don't have the engineers going, well, that shape looks cool, but you can't do it like that because this is going to mess up the crash standards, or we can't build in the crumple zone that we need to build in there. And so I think in some ways it might be liberating to work on bikes rather than cars.
Well, it was liberating in a sense that I think I was more passionate about motorcycles, but we still have those same conversations. We have rider egress, we have crash testing that we do, and we have to shape the risers can only be so high for us. Because when you're in an accident, we want to make sure that you're actually, you're egressed, you leave the motorcycle without getting caught in it if something happens.
You hear that, Dyna Bros? You just heard it from Brad. You can't have the 13-inch risers on your Dyna.
No, they can. We just can't sell them that way.
There you go. Okay, there you go.
Anyway, so it is, and Nick, you're right. In some ways, it's better. In other ways, if you think about designing an automobile, it's a skin, right? You're just designing a shape, and I don't want to downplay how difficult it is to make a beautiful automobile. It's hard, but you're designing a skin. Well, the first thing I noticed when I came to Harley-Davidson and started designing motorcycles, and probably even before so, when I was just building stuff in my garage, it's like, well, it's anatomy on display. Like the heart is right there, the lungs are there, like everything is there, and you have to deal with it. You can't just put a skin over it. I can't just put it. And the first bikes I designed, I was always putting bodies on them, and it's like, well, yeah, you're kind of cheating, And then you learn at Harley that one of the greatest things about Harley-Davidson is it's like we celebrate the mechanicalness of the bikes.
Absolutely.
And so every fastener, every cable, every component we think about, and we work hand in hand with the engineers to make sure that it's a symphony of different parts, and they all have to kind of it's got to be the same tune at the end of the day. And, and you've got round stuff and square stuff and black stuff and shiny stuff, and so that's more of a challenge, I thought.
Yeah.
You know, in some ways.
I could also imagine too that I don't think very many brands deal with the accusation of that's not that brand in the way that Harley does, meaning like you might be slightly less constrained by like hitting a certain aerodynamic profile for fuel efficiency or, you know, crumple zones, like I said, but you're still restrained by the idea
That's right.
of your consumers as to what actually constitutes a Harley to a certain degree.
Yeah,
And I wonder if
like a
that's
Harley.
frustrating where you might have this idea for this beautiful bike and you want to build it, but you know that if you make it look like that, there's going to be people coming out of the woodworks on every social media site imaginable saying, that's not a Harley, that's not a Harley. It's like a blessing and a curse in that it to me, in my mind, is somewhat restrictive.
So there are two products that I got to, you know, had the luxury of working on with the team, is the LiveWire and then Pan America, which were right up like that was the challenge of both of those.
Bikes I love. And I love how different they are.
Yeah.
Like I'm the guy that I really dislike that comment. Like, that's not a Harley. In my mind, I'm like, well, all you're doing is pigeonholing something. Like you could experience all these other beautiful, great things, but you're restricting your mindset as to what something is. Yeah,
I think I think you're right. I mean, for sure. And you know, I've even said this in the past that the only thing that kind of keeps us from thinking it's not a Harley is sort of whatever the personal biases you have in your mind are. But if you really look at both of those motorcycles, we took the same DNA that's in a 36 knucklehead, and we used that same DNA. It's mechanical. It's powertrain on display. A crown jewel. Powertrain's a crown jewel. First thing you noticed. Beautifully displayed. The rest of the motorcycle is essentially the setting that diamond sits in, and we pay more attention than any other motorcycle brand, in my opinion, that I've seen, to things like where the cable's going to go. And I don't want to see wires. We want the engine to be completely unobscured. It's just that's the first thing you have to notice when you look at a Harley-Davidson. And we look at the castings, and we go into the detail. We drive the engineering team nuts with this stuff. You know, like we need that washer to slightly darker silver. They're like, what? You know, it's like, what washer? Like, they don't even, you know, it's like, and we're like, no, you know, this is, you know, Harleys don't end up in landfills. This is a family heirloom. That's how we treat each one. It's never going to be thrown away. It's going to be handed down from generation to generation. It's got to last. It's got to live up to that kind of the legend of the brand. So all those rules apply to everything that we do. And so it is a challenge sometimes, but you know, that's what the design team does. You know, we kind of remind people of like, this is why this is important, you know, inside the company.
I'm going to use that on the sales floor. Harley-Davidsons do not end up in landfills.
They don't.
They don't. Yeah, I mean, people just keep them. You don't get rid of Harley-Davidsons. They're not a disposable vehicle. They stay around. They're built to last. The quality is that they. I mean, how many old Harley-Davidsons? I mean, we celebrate old Harley-Davidsons. You know, you were just at that show in Palm Springs, right? Where we're celebrating these choppers and these old bikes, which is probably a perfect segue to lead into my next discussion.
Sure.
So, one of my favorite stories about Brad that I tell people is, and I don't think I've ever told you this. You probably don't know what kind of impact it had on me at the time. But I was at the Born Free show, and it was this last year. It was a few months ago, and Brad was there. And we were just talking and stuff, looking at the bikes and things like that. And Brad was pointing out certain things on the choppers and stuff like that. And he's like, hey, Matt, how long have you been coming to the Born Free show? And I said, well, you know, I'm kind of a regular here. And you know, I've been here for about 4 or 5 years now, you know, coming every year for 5. I think it's been 5 years, maybe 6 years. But Brad's like, cool, yeah. And then I'm all, so how long you kind of been in the scene, Brad, you know? And Brad's like, oh yeah, I've been an invited chopper builder since like Born Free. What was it, 3 or 4?
3 or 4, yeah.
I was like, okay, I'm gonna put my tail between my legs. I'm gonna walk over here now. And but like that right there was like, oh my gosh, dude, this is a dude that we have building designing the Harley-Davidsons, and this is a guy who's been so in tune with like the chopper scene. I mean, he has the school background, but honestly, like I think a big criticism that the motor company has gotten in the last, 15, 20 years is a lot of people say, wow, Harley-Davidson, the executives and those guys, they're a bunch of suits. They're so out of touch with the writing community. And, you know, if they would just come out and listen to the writers. And I feel like in the past 3, 4, 5 years, like we've made a movement towards being more what did you call it, customer-centric thinking. I feel like I've seen that more. You know, if you go back like 2009, 2010, like I would hear that a lot. And like I read a lot of online chatter about like what the criticisms are and what the good things are about Harley as well. And when I think of a guy like you, Brad, I'm like, there's no way anybody could ever say that comment, because this is a guy who's been designing, I mean, American vehicles, you know, Ford, and now Harley-Davidson's, and a guy who's been building custom choppers for so long. Talk a little bit about your background in the vintage and like the custom chopper scene.
Well, it started with the BMW.
Okay. Good way to start off. Good job.
It's, you know, when I was still in design school, like a lot of folks that are in art school, I was in a band, and horrible band. We were terrible, but we had this rehearsal space that was an old welding shop in a building in downtown Detroit. And it was actually a building. It was Camilo Pardo who designed the Ford GT. He's kind of, you know, pretty well-known guy in his own right. This was his building, and it was up on the 3rd floor. There was a metal shop. And anyway, we would rehearse, and we would take breaks and stuff. And I noticed it was an abandoned metal shop. Like he bought the building kind of as is, and there were a bunch of like old Bridgeports and stuff in there, which I think about it now, it's like, wow, he was sitting on a gold mine. But there was a pile of scrap metal in the corner, and there was a handlebar sticking out of the scrap metal. And so like I started like every 20-minute, you know, break, I'd take a few more bits of metal off this thing, and eventually it was this old BMW. It was this 1955 R50. It was a 500cc boxer, and it was just beat to hell, but it was all there. And I'm like, oh, cool, you know. And I had restored some cars, and anyone who's restored a car, which I'm sure a lot of these folks will understand this, it's a lot of work, a lot of money, it takes a lot of space. So I was really wanting to like do a bike, and so I asked Camilo, I'm like, whose bike is this? He's like, I don't know. He's Brad. It came with the building. He's like, if you can get it out of there, you can have it, you know. So I got it out of there, took it home and restored it, and got it running, and it took 60 weight oil, like a lot of vintage bikes do. So one day, this is like right after I got it done. This is probably the first summer, summer I got it done. I rode it up to the local Harley shop to get oil. It was the only place I knew to get 60 weight oil, and there was a woman in the parking lot came out to me and said, hey, my husband is a collector of bikes, and he has old BMWs like this, and she's like, he would really be stoked to see somebody your age on the bike. He's battling cancer right now, and it would really kind of bring his spirits up if you would ride over right now to our house and show him the bike. And I'm just like, okay, you know. So I did, and this gentleman opened up his garage, and he had like 150 bikes. He was a massive collector.
Like BMWs or all kinds of bikes?
No, well, this is where Harley comes really into the picture, because he starts taking me down the rows, and I saw a bike, and I'm like, well, what is that? Like, what is that bike? And he's like, oh, that's a 1946 Knucklehead, and I'm like I was used to the Harleys at the Harley shop, you know, like, you know, the Road Kings and Ultra Classics and stuff, and I'm like, that is incredible. You know, the motor's so beautiful, and so. That is how it all started for me, and so I put the BMW down and started looking for a Harley right at that moment, and I found a 1939 ULH, kind of a semi-basket case it was running, but it was a big twin flathead, so it kind of had the lines of the Knucklehead, but it was a flathead. At that time, nobody was really paying the big money for flathead, so I could afford it. And what was really cool is it was ULH, so it's the high compression 13 fin. You know, it's sort of the rare one, and I didn't even know that when I bought it. But I bought it from this guy in Ohio, and it was a snowstorm, and there was a shotgun on the table and a bag of. I mean, it was like, you know,
old school.
It was it was like you couldn't have scripted a more authentic Harley purchase, and
that's rad.
Anyways, yeah, so I got the bike home, and I tore it apart in my living room, and over the course of a winter, I kind of made a chopper out of it.
Very cool.
Yeah,
so that was like your start, huh?
Yeah, it was my first Harley. It was the 39 ULH, and then eventually I got into the modern stuff.
And from there, you just started buying more choppers and.
Yeah, well, I rode it. I mean, I didn't have a ton of money at that time, so I rode it a lot, and I just realized that wherever I took it, I would take it to Sturgis, I'd take it to Daytona, because Ford would send Harley trucks out to be like the new Harley truck to be shown. Mm-hmm. So I'd sneak my flathead in the back of the Harley truck, and so then I'd ride a modern bike. I'd ride a modern Harley out there because Harley gave Ford at that time, we gave them some trucks. They gave us some bikes to use every year. It was like an exchange program.
Okay.
So I had a brand new Harley to ride that Ford owned out to Sturgis or ride down to Daytona. So I started riding to all the shows, and then I'd get there and have my flathead, and I'd ride my flathead around. And so, as many folks know, as soon as you start riding an old Harley around, there's just people come out of the woodwork that want to talk to you about
Oh,
it.
yeah, I'm sure.
And it's just the coolest community, and everybody wants to, you have these sort of, you have these perceptions about Harley-Davidson being like a bunch of gruff folks that aren't going to like pay attention to you, and it's
Stuck up and arrogant.
Yeah, and
It's not the truth.
It's like the total opposite, And I just, you go to the dealerships and folks are being really cool, and I'd ride that bike in, and service guys would come out and they, hey, if you need a part, we still have parts in the back for this, So I just thought this was the coolest community. Everyone's like super rad, and I had been around car clubs and stuff with some of my friends who were into other stuff, like Ferrari and Porsche and stuff, and the folks were nice enough, but there was like it wasn't like the Harley folks were just so down to earth. Yeah. And then finally, if someone's like, well, you got to go to Wasion, you got to go to the swap meet, and this is so long ago now, but I don't even know how long ago it is, but 25 years.
What did you say the swap meet was called?
Wasion. It's
Where's that at?
So Wasion, Ohio is just south of the border of Michigan, kind of southeastern Michigan.
Okay.
And it's close to Toledo.
Okay.
But it's the Antique Motorcycle Club of America. They put on, for a long time, they put on a swap meet. It's basically a vintage, like an antique motorcycle swap meet. And on Friday night, there's flat track races at this old horse track that's there at the little facility. On the weekend, the church comes in and makes ice cream.
Nice.
It's a great taco truck comes in. Yeah. And I'd never seen anything like this. And it was just all these, these are guys that have parts in their basements, and they come in and they just throw a card table out, and everyone swaps parts and buys parts, and there's bikes, and all of a sudden there's this whole other world. And I'm like, I'd been working on the Harley trucks for a while. I knew Willie and Louie and kind of the company, and I was getting to know the brand, the modern stuff. But when you go to those swap meets, you realize that that's where the essence of the brand lives, is with those people. And so, I'm a huge advocate of the American Antique Motorcycle Club and going to those swap meets and put your tent in the back of your chopper and stay there for 3 days and eat the food and watch the racing and meet people. And so now, like my closest friends in my life, some of the the best relationships I've ever had have come from those swap meets. And so it's a special brand.
Yeah, that's very cool. Talk real quick, Brad. What's in your garage right now? Tell us what we opened up Brad Richards' garage. What are we going to see in there?
So I always have a modern Harley. I try to get one every year, and I trade in. But I have like a Street Glide Special that has
good choice.
A few things. Yeah, it's a great motorcycle for long distance travel, and it's comfortable two up. And my wife can ride it. I can ride it. We have 2 Lowrider S's. I have a 16.5 Lowrider S. That's like one of the first bikes that I was, able to work on at Harley when I got here. So that's a really special bike to me. And
cool.
And then we have a modern, we have a Softail Lowrider S that my wife has done a really great job sort of, building, kind of to her specs. And there's 3 pan heads, there's a knucklehead, there's
I love
that
knucklehead. You got that black one that you brought to Born Free.
Yeah, 40. Yeah.
What is it?
It's a 40. It's the. Remember I said I met the guy showed me the bike, and I was like, "What is that?" I finally
is that bike?
It is not that bike,
okay.
But it is the exact model, same year,
okay.
Same color. I wanted it to be that bike. Yeah.
That's cool. So you probably sold it, and then you decided, hey, I need to get a replacement for it at one point.
Well, I never bought the knucklehead.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
So that's the other thing. They never sell anything. So when you say, "Oh, Harleys don't end up in landfills," it's because no one wants to let go of them.
Right.
They're like family members.
Yeah.
So there's too many motorcycles, but they're like 99% of them are Harley-Davidsons. So there's always something on the lift right now. I think I have a panhead on the lift that I'm working on, and then I'm also I'm doing some work on my Lowrider S to the 16.5, updating the suspension and so on.
You mentioned that one of the first bikes you got to work on was the Lowrider S.
Yeah.
What are some of, in your opinion, your career with Harley-Davidson, what are some of like the things or the bikes or the style points that you're most proud of? Would that be one of them?
For me, yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was a bike that Dice Nagayo, who's a phenomenal designer on the team, he's an art center guy, so he came from Art Center Design School out here, which was sort of like the competition with the school that I went to. But he had a version of that. It wasn't quite exactly that, but it was very close. And when I came on board, there just happened to be an open slot in the life cycle plan. I'm not sure what the circumstances were, but it's like, hey, Brad, we need a bike like right now
to go on the Dyna platform.
Yeah, we need something here. So I just, Dice had showed me that bike, and I'm like, there's just no way that bike is not going to be a runaway hit. I mean, it's just. Yeah. So I said, yeah. So we made a few changes. Did the color? I think we tweaked the seat and we tweaked the rider position just slightly. But he had, like I said, most of it was done, and we took it and we showed it to some of the folks, and half the folks were like, yeah, I don't know, this looks like a black bike, I'm like, no, that's gonna be a hit, like we got to do this. Yeah. So thankfully, some folks listened, and we got it on the LCP, and it turned out to be, it's become probably one of our most iconic, modern bikes now.
100%. Yeah. I know Nick's a fan.
Yeah, yeah. That bike, and especially like the Softail Lowrider S, I think.
I guess I should clarify that. You had one Softail Softail Lowrider, and then you had a Lowrider S after that.
I've spent a lot of time and money trying to basically replicate a modern version of my father's '85 FXR.
Oh yeah,
which I still have, but it's just not something that I want to try to put 40 miles a day on.
Sure.
For a variety of reasons. Although I probably would do it fine. But because of that, I ended up blacking out an 18 lowrider because there was that gap in between where there was no lowrider.
What's up with that gap, by the way, Brad? You had this runaway hit. You have the biggest controversial move in the modern history of Harley-Davidson, where you got rid of the Dyna Lowrider S. The Dyna Bros were up in upheaval. You had a civil war going on. And then it's like, okay, well, let's wait till 2020 before we re-release the Lowrider S. Like, what happened there, Brad?
Well, I told you that. Most Harley-Davidsons, especially on a complete redesign like the Softail was, new chassis, new architecture, new powertrain. It takes 3 or 4 years to design a bike from sketch to getting it into the customer's hands.
Yeah.
So when I said they had like a last minute opening in the life cycle plan, that was an anomaly that never happens. We're usually very thoughtful and planful about what's coming next, and we have our act together in that sense. But this was, I can't remember exactly what the circumstances were, but it was one where it's like, hey, we have like a year and a half to get this into the dealerships, which is like unheard of in terms of time. And the fact that the bike it's really just a color material play with a few, like with the 110 powertrain and 16.5 and a few other bits. We could do it really quick, without with due respect to other folks at the company who are no longer there. They not everyone saw the potential in that motorcycle, so they kind of saw it as like a one and done. This is going to be a Roman candle. We're only going to sell 2,000 of them, and that's going to be it. And I think everyone in the studio was like, well, that's going to be a bike that we're going to keep doing. So we did try to get it into that Softail launch in 2018, but we had so much on the table we couldn't do it, and so I wanted to pull a bike out and put that in, but at the time I just got into the company. I wasn't a vice president yet, so I was I don't know if I didn't have the cojones at that time to go into up to the executive boardroom and bang on the table, but eventually we got it in, and I think people saw the kind of like more aware personalities prevailed, and we got that put into the portfolio on a more permanent basis.
Yeah, well, all I can do is just speak from what we've seen here at our dealership. And as soon as the Dyna Lowrider was discontinued, the last year was a 17, then in the 18 model year, the Softails were way better than the Dynas were. I think everybody knows that at this point. But at that point, like, not everybody knew that, hey, this new Softail rides better, handles better, is lighter.
100%.
Is way better in every measurable way.
Yep.
But people were still paying over MSRP for Dyna lowriders. Like, it was that hot. The culture was that strong in the club Dyna scene, if you want to call it that.
We had guys like me that were dropping thousands upon thousands of dollars to take the new Softail and black it out and put a big motor in it.
Yeah. Right.
And it's it's like anytime we're doing that, where we're literally building bikes, and we have like almost like an assembly line in the back of we're blacking out lowriders and putting 114s in them now. We realize it's like, okay, there's probably a gap in this market where exactly where the 2020 the Lowrider S eventually filled. But
when we launched it, I knew that I'm like, we should get rid of that one. If we stick that one in, this would be a much better situation. But again, it takes so much planning, and so many folks kind of there's a massive process getting a bike again, into the hands of our customers, and you can't disrupt it. It would have been incredibly disruptive to do that. It would have been the wrong thing to do, even though from a product standpoint, it was the right thing to do. And so, what's great about that is that was a bike that kind of, I think, gave the design team some credence inside the company. They're like, oh, okay, well, yeah, oh, well,
These guys know what they're talking
they
about.
called that one, yeah. So, it's not like
Go figure.
because ideas for motorcycles come from a variety of inputs, not just us. There's
Totally.
regional inputs from because there might be a bike that's really popular in Australia that we don't see that popularity here, but we know we have to feed it there because it's the most popular, most profitable bike. So we get input from folks, and so to sit here and say that we design every motorcycle. I mean, we do design every motorcycle, but the ideas come from a variety of places. Could be market research, could be Pan America is a great example of that, where it was like
Great segue. Let's talk about Pan America.
So here's this market, the only segment in motorcycling that's growing. We're not playing in it. BMW's chipping away at us in North America with it. Look at the volumes of adventure touring bikes outside of North America are just massive, and so tremendous opportunity to do something. So that one came from just like looking at the sales figures of segments of motorcycle segments, and all of us just saying, okay, let's do this, And I'll be honest, we were kicking around the idea when I came on board. I was like, oof, that's going to be,
it's a huge undertaking.
That's like, okay, like I see the opportunity, not 100% sure how we make that a Harley-Davidson, but in what ended up happening, and I've told this in all the, people, anyone's paying attention, it took a story. And that whole idea of like, we had the design, and we were showing it to folks, and no one was buying it inside the company. It was like, no, that's not it.
So you had your like basic sketches of what it would look like.
So we had a model. We built a mock-up.
Okay.
So it looks like a real motorcycle. We still have it. It's probably going to go in the museum.
Nice.
But we started taking it around, and people are like, no, that's, it doesn't look like a BMW,
Which is exactly what we wanted,
right?
Or it's like what you wanted at the time.
Yeah, I think that we just, and so what I realized is that this is going to be a really hard sell. Like, this is going to be tough. And even inside the studio, we struggled with it. It went through like 3 or 4 designers. It was one of those bikes that everyone ended up having a little bit like a line on. It wasn't like one person nailed it. And it was a struggle because there was so much back and forth about what it should look like. And finally, we just, I think I drew a straight line on the page and just said, like, all adventure touring bikes have 2 lines that basically do this. Everyone, there's a line that goes from the taillight to the front axle, and there's a line that goes from the top of the fuel tank to like the top of the front tire, and they're like this. And I said, well, if we want to stand out, let's go flat. Let's go North American, utilitarian. Let's be Jeep. Let's be Scout. Let's be Bronco. Let's be military Jeep. World War II.
American off-road.
Yeah. Like everyone else is trying to do some kind of science fiction thing. I'm like, why the hell would we do that? I don't want to do that. Like, well, that's what everyone expects in that segment. It's like, well, let's not do what everyone expects. Let's do something unexpected. And so we created the design, and we were so proud of it because I had convinced everybody inside the studio this is the bike, like that we were just drinking our own Kool-Aid, And so we get to the first like big executive meeting where we unveil it, and we literally take the thing, and it's just like silence. Everyone's just like, ooh, okay, and so then I kind of like regrouped, and I was still kind of new in my leadership role, and I'm like, all right, what do I get? And then I realized, we didn't tell the story.
So wait, real quick, when you showed him that model, how close was it to the final product that you have now? Is this it was
Same
what you
thing.
have, what we have right now?
Same thing.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, which is a testament to engineering, by the way, that they're able to deliver exactly what we come up with. Like that doesn't happen. Usually, our engineers are so good. I'm so proud of that team. They really do nail our vision every time. It's pretty impressive.
That's rad.
But anyway, so I said, all right, we got to tell a story. And so we came back, and I put a PowerPoint together, and it was like story time, and it was, hey, there's no roads when the company started. And, we did have an adventure bike. It's called the WLA, and here's some pictures of it, in World War II. And so we just stitched that story together, and we won Baja. And so I went to every executive leader with that story, because I think they were probably saying, is this Brad guy going to stick around? I don't know. Maybe he's not the right guy. And I remember going to each one, and as soon as they got done with the presentation, they're like, oh, yeah, that is the bike. That's the bike, you know. And everyone got excited about the bike. And I just thought, wow, the power of story to land, you know, to basically create the foundation for the aesthetic, like the vision, like what you see physically manifest in a product needs to have a story. It has to have, like, and
it's marketing sales 101 right there.
It is, yeah. Well, I learned a huge lesson. So, and so that's what every bike we do now. We tell a little story. There's a theme board with like, here's why this matters. Here's how it connects to our lineage. And so that's how we do it. But the Pan America was a really special case. And even when Jochen came on board, you know, he was like, because I think at that same moment we had unveiled it at a dealer show, and someone had done a YouTube video just lambasting the design.
Oh, really?
Which happens. Like, as a designer, you got to have a thick skin. So I'm just like, yeah, whatever. You know, who cares? I believe in it. And that's all that matters to me.
Yeah.
But Jochen's like, well, wait a minute. Like, you know, let's talk about this. Is this the bike? You know, and so I had that. I said, let me take you through the story. And to his credit, he's like, oh, okay, yeah, 100%, get it. That makes perfect sense now. So, like, not an issue any longer. And so that's the bike we went to market with.
So big time kudos. I mean, I cannot even imagine trying to design a new adventure touring bike for Harley-Davidson Motor Company when nothing has set a precedence in the history of the company, really. And you guys nailed it. Like, I read a ton of online chatter, and just obviously we're here on the showroom floor and listening to people talk about it. Mm-hmm. People love that design. I, for one, love it. I bought one. Nick loves it. He bought one. The design's awesome. Like, the fact that you guys did do something different, I think is so important, because I think the Harley-Davidson show is be the trendsetter, the guys that are doing it first, doing it differently. Me personally, I have just this copy radar that's constantly going on. I love originals. I hate it when I see people copying somebody else's like design. And so I think you guys did make a bike that when you look at it, it's like, boom, that is the Harley-Davidson. You know, you can look at like some of the Triumphs and some of these other bikes, and like, to someone who's a little bit untrained, oh, they don't know quite which manufacturer that bike is, not the Harley. You know, that's a Pan America. So yeah, huge, success, I would say. And, you know, now that we have a year gone by since that bike was released, and all the reviewers that have gotten to ride it, and all the, magazines, the publications that have written about it, it's been a huge success. Huge success for Harley-Davidson. And so kudos to you guys. I've been pretty vocal recently about just how many people reached out to me personally and sent me messages that Harley-Davidson's going to fail. And like I have something to do with like the design of the bike. I don't. They just know that I'm a cheerleader for Harley-Davidson. But everyone wants to just say, oh, it's never going to work, Matt. You know, sorry, bro. It's going to be too heavy. It's going to be $50,000. Mm-hmm. And here we are a year later. Yeah. It's a smash success, the #1 best-selling adventure touring bike in North America.
Yeah. Chipping away in Europe.
I like it. Yeah. And so, good kudos to you and the engineering team. I mean, the engineering team did amazing. We're talking about the Rev Max platform this last year that came out. Huge platform. And I think this is probably a good segue too to talk about the the Sportster S. Sure. Sportster S. What kind of a role did you play in that? And like, walk us through like your thought.
Yeah. So, from a design standpoint, Sportster S, the sketch was done when I came on board. That was one that, because it takes so long to create a motorcycle, a lot of the sketches for, like a lot of the Softail stuff was done. Sport Glide was done before I got there. And so, a lot of that stuff is just now starting to see the hand at least from my leadership, and from the recent change in leadership at the company as well. So, like, from here on out, I think everyone's going to be just so stoked with the product. And I mean, on the 26th of this month, I can't wait to unveil. I can't wait for you guys to see what we're going to show you.
We can't wait either, man.
Yeah. So, but that bike was one that was done. The clay model was pretty much done a little tweaking. Ben McGinley, phenomenal designer. He's now the director of LiveWire Design. Incredibly talented designer that luckily I inherited when I came on board, and he had it done, and he's always done really interesting mashups. He's a younger designer, and he's got a great eye and real passionate about the brand. FXR rider, and anyway, so he had that, and that was another one where I'm like, okay, it's a bit of a mashup, and then what we realized is that if this is going to sort of set the tone for the new RevMax platform and how we envision Sportster with it, that it needs to be pretty polarizing, not unlike Pan America. Like it needs to be like people would probably, I think people can kind of expect what most people thought we should have done is just put a Rev Max motor in sort of a classic Sportster silhouette. But we wanted to do something that would get people talking about it. And we knew that the architecture was just incredibly capable, like way more capable than any other Harley-Davidson that we've ever had, because of the engineering team, like you said, the great engineering team that created Pan America. And by the way, Pan America would not be the success. Is not that motorcycle is probably its success is probably more due to the capable engineering of making that a respectable motorcycle, and also innovating in the space where no one had. We created the adjustable ride height, and that's something that no one had thought of and done. So
very important to someone like me.
Yeah.
It's the only reason I can be in the big adventure segment at all, is that technology exists.
Right. So that was a coupling of, probably engineering being even a little more important to that customer and function. Although they might not admit it, I think they do care about styling and design.
I think touching on what you were saying in terms of like everyone saying, well, that doesn't look like the BMW, that doesn't look like the other bikes in the space.
Yeah.
I think it's like it's one of those things where I've always thought that space, I've always admired it. Yeah. I've always thought it has been filled with hideous vehicles. Like I've appreciated what they're capable of, but like just as someone who loves the way a classic Harley looks, like I've always thought that like the GS, while I know it's an amazing machine, like I don't have anything bad really to say about it. I know the KTM's a really cool bike. Nothing bad to say about it. Like they're good bikes.
100%.
But I don't think they're particularly beautiful machines.
Right.
It's an acquired taste.
Someone doing something radically different in that space, like it was really important to recognize that that's a space ripe for doing something radically different.
Yeah.
Because everyone's doing the same thing, and no one looks at those and goes, those are gorgeous. Like most people look at them and go, okay, I understand why it looks like that.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't one that's like you can't create a metric and grade each one and say this one's better than the other. It's just what's right for our customers. And we knew what was right for our customers, something that had a little road glide in it, had a lot of Harley in the V-twin motor, and felt a little bit like an off-road vehicle with the big knobby tires. And like we wanted to play up to kind of what we love as North Americans about off-road. Getting back to Sportster S, right? So that one, again, was designed to be polarizing, and so
very radical, very out there. I mean, you got the high mount exhaust, the fat tires, the pill headlight. Like, it's something that's like beefy, and I like it. I think you guys accomplished exactly what you were trying to do, and that is build a bike that really stands out as something unique and different.
That's what we were trying to do, and the fact that we had the capability of that architecture is that's what makes those bikes come to life. They're incredible to ride, and so just think of where we could take that, like what we could. So it's like the world's kind of our oyster right now in terms of there's a lot of ideation on the wall of like what we want to do with the next versions of the motorcycle, of that architecture, and that architecture being so modular without a frame, it really frees us up as designers, because we don't have this rigid contact points all around the motorcycle that we can't deviate from. We can put a whole new tail section on very simply, or put a whole new front end on, steering head and rake angle and stuff, with just a slight change to a casting that bolts to the front of the motor. And that's just taken the handcuffs off the design team. So we're stoked with it, and they're just so damn fun to ride.
Oh my gosh, it's nice to see Harley-Davidson start building fast bikes. I feel like this big criticism for the longest time has been like, well, if you want a Harley, it's going to be heavy and slow. Not anymore, guys. The Rev Max, like all bets are off, man. With that thing, the Sportster is a missile.
Yeah, we were serious about putting the sport back in Sportster.
Yes, you were.
57, it was a giant killer. That motorcycle, the Sportster, was that thing was a hot rod, and then over time, we didn't evolve it, and so now we kind of reset the bar, and we have a whole new, we have a whole new set of components now, and a whole new mindset. It's sort of like we have a bit of a refresh of our soul, which is great.
Yeah. Let's talk about Icons collection. So we saw this new thing come out this last year with the Electra Glide Revival. This totally came out of left field for me. I had no idea something like this was going to happen. Then it showed up, and we're like, whoa, this is a rad idea. Like, I cannot wait to see what Harley does after this. And then to see like my grandpa's eyes light up, my dad's eyes light up, and I don't know if you saw the video that I did with my dad on that bike or not. If you haven't, you might want to, because he talks about when those bikes were brand new back in '69, them showing up and people hitting that electric starter button and just being like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This thing starts up.
Game changer.
They didn't even take it out of the crate. They hooked up like a battery to it, and we're hitting the starter button. Like everyone in the whole dealership had to press that starter button. Anyways, the history was so cool, and to hear it from like my grandfather and my father, who actually experienced it, firsthand when they were anyways, I can talk about that forever. But what inspired that? Like, tell us about the icons. What are like?
Sure.
I know you can't give anything away, but tell us about like future plans or whatever.
So there are, from time to time, there are designs that my design team comes up with, and that one was really sketched by Bjorn Schuster, and he's the manager of sort of the touring platform. And he came to me one day, and I think it was when we were getting a lot of criticism about LiveWire. We kind of went heavy into the launch and the promotion of that motorcycle, and we just said, God, people are thinking we're gonna just abandon our roots, But
yeah.
So he came to my desk and said, hey, take a look at this. Like, if we take the police seat and we paint the fairing white and the back, he showed me a sketch and he's like, it looks just like the 69. And I'm like, well, yeah, it does look just like the 69 because it's the same silhouette. Really, you haven't evolved it in, 60 years or whatever.
Yeah.
So, or 52 years. So I said, that's a great bike. And he was really passionate about it. His team was passionate about it. But we have some of these anomalies, some of these rogue ideas that don't really fit into the product portfolio. We know they're going to be great sellers, but they're not going to be 70,000 bikes. It's going to be 7,000 bikes or 700 bikes. So we couldn't find the commercial construct to make sense of doing the investment. And it was really Oaken who saw it and said, hey, let's do this. Like, let's create this thing called Collections.
Cool.
Or excuse me, Icon. It's a collection of motorcycles. And we'll say it's this many bikes. We'll keep the framework, the construct of what it is, very tight. 750 units North America, 750 units outside North America. Icons will be able to play with paint. Brad can play with paint and graphics and parts. There's going to be another, I can't really talk too much about it, but there's some other stuff coming out where it's a slightly different construct. And but that was a way for us to do some of these really iconic pieces. And the reason that Electric Glide Revival made so much sense is because we were getting all this flack about Harley's lost its way. So what a better way to remind people, no, we haven't lost our way. This is all very planned out, and we're thinking about everybody, and let's do this bike. And so we just hit the go button on that one, and there's some killer stuff about to come out. I mean, yeah, I always get in trouble when I go back to Milwaukee because on all these interviews, they're like, Brad, you came way too close. So, I mean, I want to tell you everything, but I can't. Yeah.
Well, we want to keep you at the Motor Company, so don't say too much. But I'm pumped. I mean, and just the story that you guys kind of told with the icons too, because I've watched a lot of your interviews and you've talked about it, is you walking through the museum and checking out what has happened in the past and gaining inspiration. And I mean, I'm sure you've walked through the museum a million times, but just to be able to just to see you go through there and just kind of get that inspiration from past models is very cool.
Yep.
We're running out of time here, Brad, and we respect your time, so we don't want to go too far over. But let's talk. So there's been a couple, I don't know if I want to say controversies already, but a lot of chatter since the 22 model year motorcycle.
I do have to get going.
we've been feeding you a lot of the softball questions at this point, Brad. So now to get into the hardball stuff. Okay, so
I'm ready.
The Gunship Gray, beautiful color, just came out on the Road Glide. Came out on several other bikes, Iron 883, Street Glide, things like that. There's a lot of people that are already saying, they're up in arms, they're saying, wow, what is Harley-Davidson doing? They betrayed the CVO buyers that bought in the 2018 model year when the Gunship Gray made a huge splash in the CVO world. Now my color that I have on my CVO Road Glide is no longer exclusive. So tell me the thought process around reintroducing that color.
Well, first of all, I mean, I totally respect the point of view of those folks because, CVO customers, it's our pinnacle product. It's, it's the product that we know that the customers that buy that product are just some of our most passionate customers. So I totally get it, and I really appreciate their passion. And I want them to know that we don't make these decisions just lightly. We do have conversations about what is this going to mean and what's this going to do. But the reality is, over the years, there have been many CVO colors that have eventually made their way into the OE color palette.
Interesting.
And there's a variety of reasons that we do this. Number one, it takes so long and so much money to develop a new color that sometimes we need to share. What we tried to do and what we've always done with CVOs, there's always been at least a 3-year time frame. I think a 2 or 3 year time frame. There might have been one instance over like in the last couple decades where we did it. There was a 2-year gap, but typically it's got 3 to 4 year gap. So we let the the CVO product, have it exclusively for a period of time, and then we bring it in. On Gunship Gray, there's a couple other reasons why we did it. First of all, dealers are screaming for it. Like dealers were, because customers are screaming for it.
Absolutely.
And if you think about if you think about the sort of the philosophical positioning of CVO in our portfolio, if you will, it's the aspirational product for us, right? That's like, you know, I want to own a CVO one day. I haven't owned one. Eventually I'm going to own one.
Same.
So, but maybe I can't right now. But God, you know, it's pretty cool that I can get that color on my Street Glide, on my base Street Glide. So there's this aspirational piece now that we hope that the time frame of exclusivity for that CVO customer with the Gunship Gray bike will sort of, you know, satisfy them in the fact that they've had it for that long. The other piece of it is that, you know, and I think a lot of folks forget about this, is that there's a lot more to CVO than the color of the paint.
Totally, and that's something that Nick has been saying a lot too.
It's content. So it's a long list of stuff that makes those CVO, those Gunship Gray CVOs. Those bikes are going to be so collectible because they have all the other bits. You know, the bike that we're creating today won't necessarily retain the value of the CVO in the future.
We just sold one 2 months ago for $44,000.
More than what we would have sold one
like
for
more
new.
like MSRP, or like more than MSRP.
Yeah.
We're talking about a 4-year-old motorcycle at this point. So point taken, absolutely.
When the Gunship Gray ones showed up, like last week when I was looking at them on maybe it was the week before, I was looking at it because initially my instinct was, oh no, like the CVO owners might be disappointed in this. And then I saw it and I looked at the bike and I'm like, okay, the Road Glide looks really good in Gunship Gray, no surprise. Like, I already knew it was going to look really good in that color. Yeah. But I looked at it and I was like, if I was a CVO owner, I would look at this bike and be like, that's a nice looking Road Glide. But I wouldn't at all for a second be disappointed. Other than Boombox GTS, like, I just like the system a lot more, obviously. But, like, other than that, I would look at it and be like, no, I'm perfectly content with my bike. Like, everything else on that bike, the monochromatic nature of the wheels with the paint, like everything else sets it off, and you look at it and it's, I think, like a perfect lesson in how all of the little touches actually mean way more on a CVO than most people give it credit for.
I always say that the CVO philosophy is there's 3 reads. This is how I like to explain it to the design team and explain it to, like, when we kind of reset the bar for CVO in 2018 and started doing some other things. We said, hey, let's not just speak to that traditional customer with the really wild paint and bright trim. There's a new customer that wants a more sedate-looking motorcycle, but they want all the content. They want a CVO. That was really the birth of Gunship Gray. It was the first solid CVO that we had ever done. Mm-hmm. And so that was a big watershed moment for us. But it was, I said, the way that a CVO works in my mind is that the thing goes by 50 miles an hour, you see it out on the street from 200 feet, and you look at the silhouette, it's the first thing you notice, or maybe you get a kind of a shot of the color, and someone gets intrigued, and they go into the dealership. That first 300-foot read, we call it the first read. The second read is when a customer comes into the dealership and is standing in front of the motorcycle 10 feet away, 12 feet away. They're looking at it, they're noticing, oh, look, it's got a different collection. The seat stitching has got some contrast in it. There's some badging here. That's the second read. And then the most important read to me is the third read, and that is the read that the customer has once the bike is home. Maybe it's been home for a few weeks, and they wash it for the first time, and they're washing it really close and detailing it, and they see a bit of badging or a little bit of color, like, or like the little detail we put the branding on the wheels and so on. Like that those are the Easter eggs that make CVOs so important. So you're not getting that on the Street Glide special with Gunship Gray, unfortunately. That's reserved for the CVO customer. That's the most premium pinnacle product that we have. We debated changing the name of the color.
Really?
Okay, we did, but we just thought there's something unauthentic. Like we're trying to pull the wool over someone's eyes.
Absolutely,
and that's not Harley-Davidson.
I'm so glad that you didn't change the name, because people would have known. They're like, hey, this is Gunship Gray, but they changed it to make people think that they weren't reusing the color. Yeah. It's like, no, just transparency. It's the same color. Boom, here it is.
If there is an upset CVO owner, he's still going to be upset even if the name's changed. If that exists. I think a lot of it is like outrage on the behalf of CVO owners who aren't outraged. Yeah. Probably have better things to worry about anyways. But if there was one, he's not going to be duped by the name. Right. And he's just going to be there. Oh, look at fake Ship Gray, and so you're not going to avoid that. Like, I think the reality is that color, kind of that style of gray and that just that, I don't know if there's a specific name for that genre of colors, because I feel like there's a lot of colors that are, you know, Toyota has like various types of like army greens on their trucks, and like there's like sand colors now.
They're non-metallics. We call them, at the time we were calling them
almost like a pastel to me is like what I inaccurately think.
What we call them now is we call them billiard colors, like billiard balls, right? If you think about a pool table, the balls on a pool table, there's no metallic. They're just solids. They're really beautiful buttery solids. And that's sort of what all those, like, you know, there's billiard teal, billiard red, billiard blue. Those I love those colors.
Yeah, those are some of my
and
favorite.
those colors were really hard, by the way, to get even my design team on board with, because everyone thought, well, it's got to have like all kinds of stuff going on, and it's a Harley, you know, you can't. And I'm like, no, it's the absence of that stuff that will make this stuff feel more special, and we'll reset the bar. Yeah. And so, you know, even Gunship Gray, and this is funny. Paul Martin, who's retired, he was our color material manager and worked for me, and is a phenomenal. He's phenomenal at what he does. He could not. I'm like, it's got to be solid. I don't want any effect in that gray. I want it to be unapologetic, like, you know, Eastern Bloc gray. And he's like, okay, Brad, you know. And then I noticed in the final, I walked up to it at the show, and I could see some metallic, and I'm like, Paul. He's like, all right, let's sneak something in it. You know, I was just like, you know, it was pretty funny. But that's cool. It was appropriate for that color.
But that kind of gray, you guys need it. Like, the unfortunate reality is that it may have been on a CVO, but I don't think anyone reasonably expects the motor company to not have something along that line. And it's either going to be Gunship or something extremely similar. Yeah. And if it's going to be something extremely similar, I think we all agree it might as well just be Gunship.
Yeah.
Very cool one. And it's funny too, like no one's ever brought that up before, that, hey, I saw this color on a previous model CVO and now they're reintroducing it. I think that just speaks to how popular that Gunship gray is too. Cause
it's iconic. It's become really, you're right. It's, you know, that one everyone noticed because it was such a shift at the time that we, you know, did it.
Second thing that I've already been hearing a lot of chatter about online and stuff. So you guys changed the wheels on the Fat Boy this year. And so forever it's always been this disc mag, solid disc mag.
You put the windows in.
You put the windows in there now. So my question was, okay, well, is this driven by a new style, or is this driven by some type of a functional benefit? Because everybody wants to talk about how the solid mag wheels on a Fat Boy catch crosswinds when you're going down the road, and for that reason, the Fat Boy is more susceptible to being blown around the road. So what was it, Brad?
So does the side of a semi-truck trailer. Catches a little wind as well.
That's true. Maybe you should make windows in those now.
Yeah. I mean, not to downplay the power of aerodynamics, but no, it was purely design. That wheel is gorgeous, and we always try to keep things fresh, right? And we wanted to make sure that that was another little Easter egg for the Fat Boy, you know, customer.
Yeah.
And so we said, I'm not sure who on the design team. It might even been someone on the engineering team who just said, hey, you know, we could easily, you know, mill these out of here and see what the wheel looks like. And it's got a beautiful cross section, and it's very deep. Yeah. And so we said, yeah, let's look at it. So I remember they rolled one into the studio. They had done it, and all of us were just like, oh yeah, just no brainer, just do it. It's beautiful. You know, it's given the wheel a new life. So no, it had nothing to do with any safety issues. You know, fortunately.
Okay. That's cool. Well, I'm glad we dispelled that. You know, you guys heard it now from Brad Richards. Okay, so that's a pretty credible resource, I think.
And if it gives anybody, you know, any more comfort, I'm a land speed racer. I've raced at Bonneville a few times, and so I know about that stuff. But no, it was pure design. Yeah.
I did not know that about you. You're a land speed racer?
Yeah, I've raced. I have a 50 panhead that I raced out at Bonneville a few times. It's got some. I didn't get a record at Bonneville because, as people know who race at Bonneville, it's an incredibly humbling place. You know,
a lot of fast dudes out there.
Yeah, I think we went like 131, and which was pretty respectable for a 50 panhead in a kind of a stock class. But I think we raced it at Maxton. We raced it at the Ohio Mile. I think it has 3 or 4 records. We went 141 there. But
wow.
Anyway,
that's
so
freaking badass.
I digress.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, I didn't know that about you. Find all kinds of things out about Brad here. I think we'll end here pretty quick, but on a final note, though, Further and Faster, virtual launch coming up on the 26th.
January 26th. Yeah.
So, I know you can't give anything away, but you know, what can we expect? I mean, what's up with the work? Like, do we expect a bike that's going to be going further and faster this year, or what's?
Well, I think you have. Yeah, I think it's probably. When we think about the titles of these things, they have to do with what we're about to show. So, and it'll make sense when you see the product. Is what I'm going to say. But I mean, clearly there's been a shift in the trend with the core. I would say with what we would consider sort of the contemporary core of the company in terms of the customer. And we've gone from, in the last 10 years, we've gone from, if you went to Daytona or Sturgis, you would see bikes that were essentially like rolling sculpture, right? Big front wheels, stretched bodywork, crazy paint, slammed to the ground, massive powertrain, but I don't know where we're going with it because you can't really turn. I mean, some of them weren't like that, but
yeah.
So but now, and so the new generation has said, like in art, in music, in fashion, in architecture, the new generation rebels against the current generation. And so the new generation of riders, a lot of them, kind of first kind of jumping on this, getting into this trend and smelling it out here and embracing it. They said, okay, I see what those guys are doing. It's great. It's respectable. There's a lot of detail and energy and work and thought that has to go into those motorcycles. But, we're going to put our value somewhere else, and that's in outright performance. We want the bikes to look visually engaging and stunning like those guys did, but we also want them to be highly functional, and they need to be able to split lanes. They need to be able to go into a canyon. They need to be able to, some of them still need to be able to carry 2 people and luggage and so on. So, the shift to performance is become it's pretty obvious that's a strong trend, and we're seeing it pretty much in every show that we go to around the world. So that shift is coming, and we want to get ahead of it. And certainly bikes like Lowrider S and so on have embraced that. Sportster S is another one. There's even, you could even say Pan America has sort of embraced it as well in terms of function first and performance first, and and profiling second. And so that's probably about as much as I could say, but just stay tuned, and it's going to be a really exciting year that's, not necessarily over at January 26th either.
Yeah, well, we do see, last model year, we saw the Sportster S was a mid-model year launch.
Yeah.
The Icons bike was a mid-model year launch. So, a lot of cool things to come, in the model year. Yeah. Well, thank you again for your time,
you bet.
Brad.
Thanks.
Really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and thanks, Matt, for inviting me. And it's an honor to be here, and we love what you do, and we certainly a lot of our customers pay attention to what you guys are doing and the dealership and so on, especially here in Southern California and other places. So happy to come talk to you, and I'm looking forward to. Hopefully, you guys will take me around and show me what you guys are building.
Let's do a tour, man.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
We've got a couple things I think back there that we can show you.
Yeah, I can't wait to see them.
All right on, Brad. Well, thanks a lot.
Yeah,
and thanks a lot for watching, guys. And we'll see you on the next one. Later.
Bye, everybody.
Put the right people in the room, and you get the right feedback from the customers. You get the right kind of technology and the right kind of thinking, the right kind of mindset. Keep the soul in all the decisions, and you get motorcycles like this that push all the boundaries and deliver that Harley-Davidson experience.